Hello and welcome to this game review. In this one we will see quite a good game in which White developed according to the opening principles and got a winning advantage till later he had a choice between two pawns and which one to take, and the choice was not made correctly because instead of the center pawn, a pawn on the side of the board was taken instead. So let's take a look. So Black already made two mistakes in the first two moves, not really taking the center. Well, okay, e6 is not a mistake as long as you play d5, but now White has the perfect center, so already White is quite a bit better. Next we develop, Black continues to not develop the pieces, and f4. Of course this isn't a necessary pawn move, but if our opponent is playing so slowly, we can afford to waste one move with the pawn to get more space in the center. Knight f3, castles, bishop d2. Developing this bishop to d2 was not entirely necessary. We could already think about moves such as f5, though at this point still e5 would close up the position, so maybe something like queen e1 could be played, but bishop d2 is of course fine. g6, queen e2, and f5, so everything is according to the principles. The opponent only has three pieces developed, the king is in the center, White has the center, he has connected the rooks, he has developed basically all of the pieces. This calls for action, and f5 creates an idea to take on e6 to open the f-file, as well as creating a weakness on e6. So Black takes, opening up the position, and e5. We open up the position as much as possible. Knight takes rook ae1, and knight e7, and here White opens the position further, and here we could already play f6, which would attack this knight, which doesn't really have a good place to go. For example, if here we can take, and now this pawn on f6 is extremely strong, and at minimum we could try to get the pawn on e5, though maybe something like queen d3 attacking here would be even better. The pawn can go to f7 if needed, and White is just winning positionally. So instead bishop e4, this is fine, but this kind of wastes time as it allows Black to exchange some pieces and play f6. Of course, he has a lot of holes around his position, but he's not yet losing because the bishop on e5 is quite stable for the moment. So e6, f6 now. Now we already have a long-term asset in these doubled pawns. The one on d5 is extremely weak. So bishop d3, queen c7, bishop f4. So now this means White will win the pawn on e5 at least. Castles, White takes, and this undoubles the pawns, but of course if we want we can take the pawn on e5. So if we were not going to take the pawn on e5, there was no reason to double the pawns on e5, and instead we could just take the one on a6, leaving the bishop on e5, leaving the pawns as they are, badly placed, and White would still keep a big initiative here and an advantage of a pawn. But best is to take, and then to take this pawn, because now if the queens are exchanged, we have an endgame where White is a pawn up. Also there's weakness on d5, the weakness on a6 which needs attention, there's weakness on f7, and this pawn is already quite well placed. Not to mention there's a small weakness on h6 as well. White could improve the position by bringing the rook or just going to e7, and White is just completely winning with the simple plan of rook e7 next. Instead White takes this pawn, but this pawn is not very relevant. It doesn't really matter to Black if this pawn is on the board or not, and now suddenly after e4 Black has good compensation for the pawn because his queen is open and these pawns in the center are quite strong. Now White exchanges, and now we get this heavy piece endgame, which is by no means winning for White anymore. It's not very simple to convert because these pawns are quite strong, and the a-file, the a6 pawn doesn't really matter. So now rook c1, White is trying to play c4, rook h8, which looks natural, but now c4 is played, which is a nice move to undermine the control of the center. Rook g5, but this makes Black's position collapse, and White takes, and takes on e4, so now White is 3 pawns up, and Black can take one of the pawns back, but h6 drops, so now White is 3 pawns up. So now all we need is to convert the advantage, and one of the best ways to convert big advantages in material is to exchange pieces, so queen f4 really makes sense. Black obliges, and then rook c to e1, Maybe we could exchange more by playing rook f2. This would make it probably a bit more simple, but this is good enough. The rook invades. Black exchanges pieces, so this makes it even easier. And g4. Here black can at least take the pawn and take the one on a2, trying to create a passed pawn. But if we play rook f2, black will not be able to take the pawn on a2, and slowly we will advance our king. And this 3 against 1 majority on the king side means that we can create 2 connected passed pawns eventually. So king e8, rook f2, and black resigned. So pretty well played game by white. Of course, this was a correspondence game, so white had an unlimited amount of time, so the quality was quite high. Though generally in chess we should play with a limited amount of time, so maybe 90 plus 30 or 60 plus 30, because here we do not have the pressure that is usual in chess, the time situation, the need to make a move, and all these other things. So this pressure does add up to make us better chess players usually. So of course we shouldn't play bullet or something, but we shouldn't really play correspondence just to get better either, unless it's for recreational purposes. But in general, to get better, we should play with long time controls and then analyze these games.